The evidence in this case will be that the man in the black sweatshirt was the defendant, Rakim Mayers. That evidence will be uncontradicted.
This case is all about money. You're going to see the only reason we're in this courtroom is because Rocky would not agree to be a victim of another one of his crimes.
ASAP Rocky's future is on the line as he stands trial accused of firing a gun at his former friend during a 2021 showdown. While prosecutors build their case on a key witness and surveillance clips, the defense is arguing there are questionable motives behind the accusations. We're going to break all this down right now with acclaimed attorney Bradford Cohen. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey, by the way, real quick before we go any further, I don't know if you know this, but the video version of Sidebar is now available on Spotify. That's right. We're so thankful for your guys' support of Sidebar. Us getting the show on Spotify video is truly due to how loyal this audience is. So thank you so much for that. And yes, you can now watch and listen on the go, from Diddy to Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively, the crazy court moments that we cover. It is all on Spotify. So right now, you can scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description to follow Sidebar on Spotify. One of hip-hop's biggest stars, ASAP Rocky, is now standing trial in a case that could change the course of his career and land him behind bars for years. What began as an alleged altercation in 2021 has now become a courtroom drama, with Rocky's future all hanging in the balance. Now, ASAP Rocky, born Rakim Mayers, made his name in 2011 with his smash hit Peso, and it solidified his place in hip-hop history as a founding member of the iconic ASAP Mob Collective. But beyond his music, you might know him for other things because he has become a fashion mogul. He's in a very high-profile relationship with global superstar Rihanna, the mother of his two children. But now, Rocky is at the center of a legal storm, accused of firing a gun at his former friend, Terrell ASAP Relly Efron, during a heated dispute that took place in Hollywood years ago. Now, the saga begins in the fall of 2021, when Rocky and Efron, once childhood friends and fellow members of the ASAP mob, they agreed to meet in a parking garage near the W Hotel in Hollywood to seemingly settle their differences. But according to Efron, what was supposed to be a private conversation ended up turning violent. He testified in a pre-trial hearing that during the meeting, Rocky allegedly pulled out a gun and fired it at him, the bullet grazing his knuckles. Now, surveillance footage from the scene appears to show a man wearing a black hoodie, who prosecutors later identified as Rocky, holding a gun, but the defense has cast serious doubt on that footage and suggested that the weapon wasn't a real gun. It was a prop gun. This was not a real firearm. And they argued that it was a starter pistol that only fired blanks, which Rocky had used for personal security rather than a weapon capable of actually causing real harm. Now, to be clear, though, starter pistols, if they do fire blanks, they can potentially cause harm if they're fired in close proximity to another person. But what's more, no gun was recovered from the scene. And after a police search of the area, apparently no shell casings were found. I will say, though, and this is what's really interesting, days later, I believe 2 days later, Efron allegedly returned to the scene and picked up 9mm shell casings, which he apparently brought to the police. So Rocky was arrested in April of 2022 while at a Los Angeles airport as he and Rihanna were returning from a trip to Barbados. He's pleaded not guilty to 2 felony counts of assault with a semi-automatic firearm, was released on bond. We'll talk about if it's a real gun, a fake gun, whether or not this charge actually sticks. So to help me break all this down, I want to bring on renowned criminal defense attorney Bradford Cohen, who's represented some high-profile people himself, like Kodak Black and Drake. Thanks so much for coming on, Bradford. Good to see you. So what are your initial impressions on this case?
I think there's a lot going on. Right? So you have this victim that I believe has a weird story. There's some things that he says that don't really match up to what exactly the state has as evidence, the fact that he went back, and there's a lot going on there. So if it's relying solely on just his word, I think the defense can really beat this guy up. If it's also his word and then the video, that lends itself to a little bit more of a problem. And the fact that they're saying this was a starter pistol, I mean, I have a lot of experience in firearms. I've taken courses. I've had multiple cases with firearms in terms of possession or assault. I just walked a guy last year on a federal gun charge where we were alleging at first that it wasn't a real gun. And then during the trial, we kind of modified our position. But when you look at this gun itself, the fact that they're saying it's a starter pistol, that's a little bit troublesome because they don't make semi-automatic starter pistols. That's the first kind of thing that is not so great for them. But then if you say, hey, it wasn't real, maybe it's not a starter pistol, but maybe it's an airsoft or a BB gun or something else where it wouldn't leave any shells behind, you're probably headed in the right direction with that.
Let me just clarify this. Are you saying if the jury sits back and they go, wait a minute, I think he had a starter pistol, I think he fired it, maybe that's what grazed Mr. Efron's knuckles, but is that assault with a semi-automatic firearm? Wouldn't he be found not guilty?
No. So the long story short is a starter pistol cannot be considered a firearm because it doesn't fire a projectile. And if you look at the definition of a firearm, a starter pistol won't match it. The reason why they're saying it's a starter pistol is probably because there's a loud bang or there's a flash coming from it. That's why, it would have been easier to say it was a airsoft gun or if it was a BB gun. But like I said, if there's a flash from the muzzle, if there's a loud bang, obviously you can't say that. You have to say it's a starter pistol. The problem that you have is if the state puts on experts to determine whether or not it could be a starter pistol, a semi-automatic starter pistol, I think that's kind of where it kind of gets a little bit murky for the defense.
Talk to me again, the idea that the shell casings came from the alleged victim in this case. What issues does that cause for the prosecution, and does it cause any issues for the defense?
So for the prosecution, it's massive amounts of problems. Whenever you have a alleged victim going back to the scene and collecting evidence themselves, you have so many issues. The number one is you have to establish a chain of custody. What a chain of custody means is that when you have evidence on a scene or anywhere, you want to establish where it came from, how it was collected, where it went to next, who looked at it, so that you can establish the fact that no one tampered with it, that no one placed it there, that no one put fingerprints on it, that no one put DNA on it, that they didn't collect it from another area where they knew that individual might have DNA on it from, let's say, a gun range or something of that nature, and they collected it and they dropped it on the scene. That's why you need to establish a chain of custody. That's number one. That's the worst part of it. Most judges will argue, oh, the chain of custody is important, but it goes to the weight of the evidence, meaning they're not going to eliminate that evidence just because they don't establish a chain of custody, which I happen to disagree with. But they say it goes to the weight. The jury can still look at the evidence, but they're going to determine whether or not to say, yeah, this is good evidence or bad evidence. That's number one for the state that really hurts them. Number two is it shows that either the police were incompetent and they couldn't find those shell casings, or this kid is a liar. So it's like, well, which one are you going to choose? Your cops are incompetent. They couldn't find shell casings normally they have dogs that can smell out gun casings. They also have metal detectors. I mean, cops find shell casings in the woods, in all kinds of different areas. I've never had someone say, oh, I didn't find any shell casings, and then had the alleged victim go back and say, oh, I found them. I knew where to look or whatever. Shell casings fly all over the place. So it's not like the guy would know where to look for those shell casings because they're ejected from a weapon and they can go left, right, up, down, sideways. They go all over the place. So that's why you have that choice between either incompetent police or your guy is lying, your defendant is lying, your victim is lying. So that's a real trouble for the prosecution. For the defense, I don't see the trouble in it. I actually think it's a huge win for the defense. The fact that this guy went back to the scene and found his own shell casings allegedly from ASAP, I think is a huge win for the defense. I think that's what they really need to hang their hat on. The starter pistol thing, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to fly or not. Maybe.
So the prosecution will come back and counter that, say, well, look, we have surveillance footage, we have the testimony of the victim. I will mention also, we'll get to this in a little bit, a 911 phone call, maybe other witnesses who heard gunshots. But talking about what could be potential weaknesses in the prosecution's case, is that why you believe A$AP Rocky, if you believe the reporting, actually rejected a plea deal from prosecutors? This is a deal that would have resulted in 6 months in jail, a 7-year suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, because my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if he's convicted here, he could face up to 24 years in prison. That's what's being reported. Do you think that these weaknesses are why he actually chose not to move forward with the plea deal?
I certainly think that that's a big portion of it. I mean, if they have a lockdown, great case, right, the state, a defense attorney would say, hey, a coming to Jesus moment and say, hey, listen, this is what's working against us here. I think that the plea deal that was offered was a fair plea deal for the charges that are being charged. I don't know every single piece of evidence the defense is going to use or who they're going to put on. If they have a firearms expert that's going to put on the stand and say, hey, listen, not only do I know that it's a starter pistol, here's an example of a semi-automatic starter pistol. I personally have never seen one. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So they may have a load of evidence that we don't know about because a smart defense attorney like Joe Tocopina will not show all his cards to the public because he doesn't want people like me or like anyone else saying, oh, that doesn't sound right. Wait until the time is right. Throw on your evidence. The state, I'm sure, already knows what's coming. But I think that that's got to be what the motivating factor is here, is that they have some cards they haven't played.
Real quick, do you think he would get like up to 24 years in prison if he's convicted? Do you think it would be something on the lesser side? And he's weighing, look, if I get convicted, I know I'm not going to get that. I might as well roll the dice. I think I have a good shot at winning.
Sure. I don't think he would get 24 years in prison. That is the maximum stacked amount that he could get. It's probably for multiple charges. And people always say, oh, this person's looking at 100 years in prison because he's got 4 first-degree felonies that are 30 years apiece, whatever it is. But that never happens. No judge ever just says, okay, I'm going to consecutively sentence you to all these different things and stack them where it's 24 years. I've seen that maybe once in my career, which is almost 30 years. What I think would happen is in California, I wouldn't doubt that he would get somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 3 to 5 years, probably would be more appropriate. No one was injured. No one was hurt. If he takes the stand, that could be an aggravating circumstance. If the judge feels like he's lying on the stand, some judges take that personally offensive and say, hey, you took the stand, you lied. It happens a lot in federal cases. You took the stand, you lied. I didn't believe you, and I'm giving you a tax for that. So there's a lot of things at play. My guess, if he was convicted, would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 years, somewhere that 4 or 5 years, I think.
And that's significant. We'll see if he actually takes the stand. And I want to play you a portion of some of the opening statements. Before we even get to that, I have to get your impression on jury selection here. So you're dealing with jury selection. Very high-profile defendant. Then again, this is California. 3 days of jury selection. The trial officially kicked off on Friday. So we have a jury of 7 women, 5 men who are now tasked with determining A$AP Rocky's fate. During jury selection, some of the potential jurors, they were asked about whether they could remain impartial given his fame, his relationship with Rihanna. So I wanted to ask you about the jury selection process. What do you think about the selection of this jury? And also, my understanding is you do not have a diverse makeup of jurors. Let's just say that.
So a lot of things are going on, right? So when you pick a jury, generally speaking, when you have someone who is a high net worth defendant, usually they can afford having a jury consultant, which I always recommend because jury consultants are great. They give you a little bit more insight. They can see things that might not be looking at as a defense attorney, because as defense attorneys, we're asking questions, we're watching their facial reactions, we're trying to watch for what people are doing or saying or things like that. And a jury consultant, that's their only job, is to watch what a jury's reaction is. So when I ask a question like, what kind of bumper stickers do you have on the back of your car? Which a lot of people say I shouldn't ask, but I like that question. And then you can watch other people on the jury shake their head yes, or maybe they make a face or whatever it is. And that helps you, right? And you might not be able to see all that. So number one is, I'm sure he has a jury consultant. Number two is, there's a lot of reports that say out of the 106 potential jurors, only 4 were African American. Now in LA County, in terms of the pool itself, in LA County, you have about a 10 or 11% of the population is African American. So it doesn't match the population of the county you're in. So that's kind of the argument, right? And you make that argument at the beginning of the case and you say, hey, listen, judge, we got to start all over again. We got to strike this whole panel. It doesn't represent the county. It doesn't represent the proper percentages. There's only 4 out of 106, and there should be 11 or 12 out of 106. So those are arguments to be made, and those might be preserved for appeal. And Joe has been to trial many, many times. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's been to battle, a lot of times. he knows what the appellate issues are. He knows what to raise. And I guarantee you he did raise that at some portion of the trial, might have been sidebar or something like that, but that it wasn't typical. It did not represent the county, that pool. So that's going to be interesting. I think the makeup of 7 men, of 7 women, 5 men, I think is also interesting. And it goes to the fact of whether or not you think women are a better selection than men. There's a lot that goes into that. And the women, depending on what the women answered to some of those questions, sometimes in gun cases, you don't want a heavy amount of women on your jury because you're afraid they may never shot a gun. They may have never saw a gun. Now, in this case, where they're saying it was a starter pistol, if there's no experts testifying, which I find hard to believe, but if there's no experts testifying and you got 7 women and 5 men, it could be that those 7 women never fired a weapon. I don't know. Those are questions you got to ask the jury. Maybe the 5 guys never fired a weapon. You're talking about Los Angeles, where the gun laws are much more strict than in the rest of the country. Right. So it could be that no one on that jury ever fired a weapon or ever handled a weapon or ever saw a weapon. What's interesting is I just got a text back from one of my friends at the FBI who is also a qualified firearms expert, because I'm wondering, is there a starter pistol that's semi-automatic? That's the one question in my mind because I've never seen one. I just got a text from him that says there's not a starter pistol that's semi-automatic, but there is a blank firing look-alike gun that you could use that is semi-automatic. It won't give you 9mm shells, obviously, because it's not meant to fire real projectiles, nor could you ever fire real projectiles from it. But he says there is one that exists, and it is from China. So I stand corrected in regard to whether or not, like I said, the thing that threw me off was that it was a starter pistol. That was the thing that threw me off, because it's not really a starter pistol. It's more for it's like a fake prop gun. Then if the state is not putting forward an expert to say that is not a starter pistol, I am an expert in this area, maybe an FBI agent or something like that. And I can tell you just from looking at this video, they don't make semi-automatic, starter pistols. Right. Then, that obviously, then it's a battle of experts.
Yep. And let's talk about that battle. So the jury heard opening statements. And in the prosecution's opening statement, attorney Paul Przlomy argued that the video evidence is indisputable and it will establish Rocky's role in this altercation.
The second person who you see, who is instantly confrontational with Mr. Efron, is the defendant, Mr. Mayers. You see on the video that Mr. Mayers is immediately aggressive towards Mr. Efron. He's pulling at Mr. Efron's sweatshirt and he's pushing Mr. Efron backward and pushes him off camera, out of camera view. The third person that you see, as I told you, is Elijah Ulanger, who also goes by ASAP Ills, or he might just be referred to as Ills throughout this. If you look closely, you can actually see his stage name embroidered on the jacket that he's wearing there. And what he attempts to do is to de-escalate this situation, to get between the 2 men and to physically separate them. And you'll see that all 3 of them go off screen for a period of time. Mr. Efron will tell you that during the period of time that they are off screen is when the defendant first produces that semi-automatic pistol from his waistband. He pulls it out of his waistband and he's holding it to Mr. Efron. Mr. Efron will tell you that the defendant pointed the gun at his chest. When Mr. Mayers comes back on screen, you can see the gun in his hand. You will hear that gun that he's holding is a semi-automatic pistol, or has features that are consistent with a semi-automatic pistol. Right now, as it's paused on the screen, you can see that he's holding that gun behind his back. But you will also see the gun come forward in front of his body before he ultimately tucks it back into his waistband. This is the location number 2, where the camera, the video that actually captured that shooting was. You can see the cameras at the very top corner of the building, and it's about 3 properties away from the location that we're seeing. So again, the video is captured at a distance. It's a admittedly grainy video. It's not the most clear that you could possibly have, but it captures enough features that you can identify who is who when you watch this video. I mean, you can see just from Mr. Mayers' facial features that he's the one wearing all black. You can see from his facial features compared to the video from the parking structure. And then, as I said, the various features of his clothing, the rhinestones on the hood of his sweatshirt in both videos, and the design, the rhinestone design on the chest of his sweatshirt at both videos. And taking all the videos in their totality and comparing them is how you'll be able to decide on the video who is who. Now, the evidence in this case will be that the man in the black sweatshirt was the defendant, Rakim Mayers. That evidence will be uncontradicted.
Okay, so Bradford, let me do a full breakdown of this, right? So I'm curious your thoughts on how important this surveillance footage is, how incriminating is it for Mr. Rocky. You also couple that with the idea that you're going to be hearing from the alleged victim in this case. He's going to be testifying to what we couldn't see in that video. And also you heard that what appeared to be a loud noise, what appeared to be a gunshot, but I will also tell you the prosecution introduced a 911 phone call where the caller can be heard saying she witnessed the shooting. You know, the witnesses talked about hearing the gunshots, or they will talk about hearing the gunshots. All of that together, what do you think about the prosecution's case?
What I thought was interesting with the opening statement was you will hear that it is consistent. The features are consistent with a semi-automatic weapon. To me, that means there is a expert witness, or there is someone they designated that's going to take the stand and say, I'm familiar with semi-automatic pistols. This is my experience. I've taken all these classes, tooling, and I fired guns since I'm 15 years old, and I know all about them. And this is consistent with a real semi-automatic pistol, because they're going to say it doesn't have a red, on some fake semi-automatics, it has a red barrel, on a red marking on the barrel that identifies it as a fake gun. Listening to the opening, I mean, it's a classic state attorney opening. They're going through the facts, not much emotion there. They're saying that it's a grainy video. You won't be able to see much. The good news for him is he didn't make a lot of promises during that opening statement, and that's a mistake that a lot of state attorneys make. I promise that you're going to see this, or you're going to see this, and they have a very difficult time of showing it. I think the video is very, very grainy, like he said. I looked at it before. I think it's a very grainy video. I think if you have a firearms expert that is going to come in and going to say, hey, here's a semi-automatic pistol. Here it is. I mean, you could actually bring in a dummy semi-automatic pistol. Here's what was used. Here's what's in the video. I think the state has a very difficult time overcoming that with that video, how grainy it is. You cannot tell from that video if it is in fact, a real firearm or not a real firearm, coupled with that he went back and picked up the shells himself, that I didn't hear the state address.
If you hear gunshots, whether it was in the video or witnesses said, I heard gunshots, how does that change anything?
It doesn't. If they're saying it's a starter pistol, which, again, they're using the term incorrectly.
Right.
But if they're saying it's a blank firing gun, right, a prop gun per se, you'd still hear something that sounds like a gunshot. That wouldn't be unusual. So I think they do have a defense there if they can establish that. And I'm telling you, the state not addressing their weaknesses in the case, although he said, oh, the video's grainy, that's a real mistake. You should address the weaknesses. Now, I didn't hear his whole opening, but if he didn't discuss that the victim went back, picked up the shells, and here's what you're going to hear, that's a little shady.
So let me present to you now a portion of the defense's opening statement led by attorney Joe Tacopina. So this is a different take on the events, and he has suggested that Efron's jealousy and his desire for money, those were key factors in the fallout between the two men. And in his opening statement, he made it clear that the defense intends to show that Efron has a history of using legal action to profit from a situation.
You're going to hear the stark contrast in two individuals. Rocky on one side, Efron on the other side, known as Relly. He represents a very different narrative. The evidence will show you that this Relly presents himself to the world as a wealthy, successful man, source lighted, he's a reporting artist, businessman. He flaunts a very lavish lifestyle on social media. He poses with luxury goods.
The same objection, none of this is evidence.
Evidence will show you this. None of this is evidence yet. There's no evidence on both sides. Posting pictures of himself with large sums of cash and whatnot. It's fraud. He is all about a money grab. The truth is far different. And you're going to see this extravagant lifestyle that this really flaunts is nothing more than a fraud, built on not success and hard work, but upon criminal activity. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is all about money. I've said it once, twice, I'll say it a few more times. The evidence will show you it's nothing more than a money grab, nothing more. A clear attempt at extortion by Relly, so he keep funding this extravagant lifestyle of his. That's the world. You're going to see the only reason we're in this courtroom is because Rocky would not agree to be a victim of another one of his crimes.
Okay, so Bradford, one more thing I'm going to add about this is that Mr. Efron has apparently already filed a separate civil lawsuit against A$AP Rocky seeking damages for what he says played out here. The outcome of that suit on hold as this trial plays out. What do you think about the defense focusing a lot of their attention on the alleged victim in this case?
Everyone has different styles when they're doing openings. I've seen some styles that, like, I don't use notes, and I think that what would have been more effective during this opening statement is I would have had printed out the actual civil lawsuit, and I would have said, you're going to hear evidence about this civil lawsuit. You hold it up, you show it to them. Juries like that. And I've seen Joe be very animated during opening. This was a mundane opening and kind of using notes and things of that nature. Here's some inside baseball. Whenever a state attorney objects during my opening and the judge overrules it, I always have a comeback and say, of course they're objecting. They don't want to hear the bad stuff. They don't want to hear the bad stuff about their case. You know, there's different little techniques that we use during trials that kind of bring it together. I think it's important. I think that's you have to have a theme of the case. His theme of the case is that this is about money. This is a money grab. I'm sure he'll have letters from lawyers demanding money. It would be great if he had texts that this kid texted someone and says, like, A$AP's going to have to pay me. All those things are fantastic. We didn't hear it, but maybe it's out there. But I think that every defense attorney has to have a theme to a case. If you have no theme, then you have no case. So I think it's interesting. I think the argument is interesting that it's a money grab. It's not an unusual defense where you have a victim who's coming forward who also filed a civil lawsuit. A lot of times, civil lawyers say, hey, let's not file a civil lawsuit until after the criminal trial because of this very nature, because we can use it as an impeachment or we can use it to show bias on behalf of the victim. I think it hurts it. I think it hurts the case because now he's got a civil case. He went back to the scene himself. He's got his own lawyer. His lawyer could have sent a private investigator there. But this guy was so, enamored, so close to the case, so desperate to make the case that he went back to the scene himself and searched around and allegedly found these shell casings. And don't forget, I'm sure that video, if they have video of it, is going to be very grainy. So we're not going to know if he dropped the shell casing there or didn't drop a shell casing. And by the time he went back and looked for shell casings, my guess is he already knew there was video. The police probably already told him, hey, there's a video camera over here.
That's a fair argument. And actually, it brings me to my final point, because I know your time is precious, and I don't want to waste any more of Bradford's
I always have time for you.
Well, thank you. So I'm gonna leave what is a big question on the table. The idea that we believe the defense is going to put on a case. They said they're going to intend to put on a case. It is unclear if A$AP Rocky himself is going to take the stand. Bradford, in a case like this, and I know you don't have all the details of everything going on, but would you recommend that a client like ASAP Rocky testify? Obviously, it's his choice, but would you recommend it? You think it would be beneficial in a case like this?
So let me tell you this. I prepare all my clients to take the stand, right? Whether or not they do is usually a last minute call. It is like literally you're at the line and you're making a decision based on what you see in front of you. So you got to see how the state's case develops to see if it's even worth it. And then you got to really make a list of pros and cons. What is that person going to benefit by taking the stand, and what can actually hurt me by him taking the stand? If they have an expert in firearms, if they have all these different things, why does he need to take the stand? If an expert's going to say, hey, this is a starter pistol, here's the example of it, here's what I got, and here's what it looks like. Why do you need to take the stand? What is he going to clear up? He's just going to say exactly what the expert's going to say, except he's going to be subject to cross-examination, and it's never a great idea. If you can avoid it, then I usually say avoid it. In self-defense situations, you can't avoid it. You know, I just had a murder case in San Francisco that I just got finished with, and the defendant took the stand. But we were asserting that it was self-defense. And it came back second degree instead of first degree. But if you're asserting self-defense, the defendant always has to take the stand, because how can you establish, unless there's other witnesses around, how are you going to establish self-defense? So this is not a self-defense case. So I don't think that he's going to need to take the stand just from looking at the evidence that I see. But again, if all of a sudden the state comes up with something, they go right instead of left, it may be something you need to clear up. I think it's a big risk in a case like this. That's not necessary.
Do you teach law? You're a professor of law anywhere? Because you really should. You should be. I wish you were my criminal law professor. Let me tell you that much.
I have taught criminal law once or twice in the past. I have no permanent gig because my take on things are a little bit different. I have real world experience, and most professors have classroom experience.
Every time we have a conversation about this, it's like, first of all, I learned so much than I did, not only about the case, but how, the background of it, and also how attorneys are thinking about these little tricks inside baseball, like you say. But my gosh, Bradford, I don't know. You're very successful, but if you wanted a side gig also as a professor, I would definitely encourage it. I think we all get a great education. But look, here's the truth. Look, the timing of ASAP Rocky's trial, it really couldn't be worse for him. I mean, yes, he's facing potentially conviction and years in prison, but for his career, he's currently riding a wave of success. He's got major projects on the rise, and he's set to headline the 2025 Rolling Loud Festival in Los Angeles, serve as a celebrity chair for the 2025 Met Gala, star alongside Denzel Washington in an upcoming Spike Lee-directed film. But again, this could all come crashing down if he's convicted. So we will keep our eyes on this trial. And I know who's also going to be following it, Bradford Cohen. Thank you so much. Great seeing you, my friend.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.